Hey guys, Daniel Tejada here from Straight Up Growth. Very excited to have our guest Kaytee on today. We have a fabulous meet cute story as well, which we're super excited to chat through. But Kaytee, why don't you tell the people about what it is that you do?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Daniel. Yes, our origin story is one for the books for sure. So I am a media dietitian. So I support value-aligned brands with my nutrition and health expertise by essentially just offering consulting and spokesperson opportunities in order to add credibility to their product and expand their reach.
Awesome. Yeah, and this is something that I think when Kaytee started wasn't necessarily a big thing, right? People didn't necessarily care about the food that they put into their bodies so much. I think it's, there was like organic way back in the day, right? But I think food and the things people talk about has changed so much. So for you, I'd love to just start about like, how has the industry changed, since you've started till now? How does it feel?
Oh man, so many changes. And even like thinking about how I got into this space, it was originally I became a healthcare practitioner because of my own health struggles. And since that time, I think as a whole, like as a society, we're really understanding more, like you said, how nutrition, how our lifestyle choices can really affect our health, right? Like, wow, what a novel concept. There was actually a study that was just published the other day. I just did an interview with Medical News Today about it. And it was showing that, they looked at people who had certain genetic risk factors and then people who across the board either lived a quote unquote unhealthy lifestyle, smoked, eating processed foods, not exercising, not sleeping well, and those who had a more favorable lifestyle. And they looked at like which is more risky. And what they found really reiterates what the research up to this point has shown, which is that we have control of our lifespan by over 60%. So it's not this idea of like, you're just determined by your genetics, right? Like we used to think like, oh, it's genetic, you're just going to have to live with it. And now it's like, no, actually like your choices do make a difference. And I think people are wanting to be more empowered. Like, okay, so I understand that, what I eat influences how I feel, not just how long I live, but how well, right? But like, how do I do that? And like, there's this big movement now on like understanding the nitty gritty science. That is very new, and I'm loving it.
Yeah, it's great that you're in the weeds now and people, it's in demand. I know even when I first started doing Amazon ads in 2016, nobody cared. Like I'd go to conferences and I'd be like, "Oh, I'm working on the sick ad platform, Amazon," and people would be like, "I don't care," right? Like it's nothing. But then eventually, like Amazon's going to do $70 billion this year in ad revenue, right? So it's a big deal. So it definitely is helpful to be on the early side. Sometimes it can definitely be a little bit lonely, I feel like on the early side, for sure. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started and sort of what how that transitioned to what you do today?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, I had some health issues when I was a teenager, both physical and mental health. So I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, and a lot of gut issues. I was sick all the time. And, it started when I was like really young. Like I'm talking like first grade. And the doctors were like, she's going to grow out of it. She's going to grow out of it. I didn't grow out of it. Everything got worse. I was taking antibiotics all the time. And that was before we knew that antibiotics were terrible for your gut and that your gut influences your mental health, right? And like all of these things are connected. And those pieces just weren't put together at that time for me and for my health. And so this all just sort of built up and built up, and I got worse and worse. And at the age of 16, I actually attempted suicide. And after that, there was sort of a shift where I learned that nutrition could play a role in mental health. And I figured, like, you know what? I've always been a little bit of a rebel. Like, you know what? These doctors are saying that there's just a chemical imbalance in my brain, and like, screw them. And so I just tried to learn everything I could. This was before like the age of the podcast, So I'm like reading paperback books and like just trying to get as much info as I could. And I became a personal trainer and I started paying attention to what I was eating, and I was noticing these significant health benefits. And at the same time, it didn't solve everything. And so I went to school and I studied psychology. I got my master's in nutrition. I did my post-grad training in functional medicine. And I ultimately, realized that yes, healthy living was important, but I had these deficiencies and my gut microbiome was out of balance. And until I really sort of brought all of that back into alignment, the healthy living alone wasn't enough. And so now, I do both. I do the brand work, and I also meet with folks one-on-one who are in a position similar to where I was and are looking to find healing.
It's awesome. I think it's a lot easier to be passionate about something when it's something that you care about, right? It's something that's important to you, and ultimately it allows you to work those extra hours and really stretch to find that information that normally wouldn't be so readily available, right? Like you mentioned. So you mentioned you do some work on the brand side. Like, what does that typically entail? What do brands look for from like a dietitian there?
Yeah, so there's a couple major things that I think about. One is credibility, right? You can be the most knowledgeable person about your product, whether it's a food or a supplement, but if you're the founder of your company and you're touting the benefits of your product, how credible is that going to sound to others? So bringing in a healthcare practitioner who has that science background or, that nutrition background and can really speak to your product's benefits as a third party really adds a lot of credibility. And I do this all the time with, there are food products that I love and supplements that I use all the time with my clients. And so it's great to be able to vouch for them and to speak to the incredible benefits that I have personally seen, both, in a clinical setting and also looking at, the fact sheet and knowing how they're third-party testing and knowing how they're doing all of these things to really add credibility. So that's the one aspect. And then the second aspect is doing advising, consulting, and so forth on the back end. So how can we really, talk about your nutrition messaging or your health messaging, creating often educational materials and so forth on that end. And then the last piece is really helping to expand reach. And there are several different ways to do this, but essentially helping your product, right, get in front of more people who it can help and benefit.
That's awesome. And so it's very interesting that you've kind of built this brand angle there, right? I think like traditionally, right, when we come like with sort of the education background that you have, practicing obviously on the individual clinical basis is standard, but how'd you get into, the brand side? That's super interesting. Obviously it's a function that brands can definitely get a lot of use of, but it's not something that I feel like they think about, first there.
There were several motivating factors. One of them was I just get so irritated. Is that the word? There's so much misinformation right now. Like there really is in the nutrition space, right? The diet wars, that's very real. And that's just a glimpse of sort of the health space on a bigger picture, right? Everyone has their own platform. So you can be talking about a product or an ingredient or, whatever it is, and people will listen to you online, but does this person actually know what they're talking about? And oftentimes, unfortunately, the answer is no. So a lot of this was really to combat misinformation and to be able to speak to the truth about health products and supplements and foods and what they do in the body and how we can really harness that and really empowering people with the knowledge to kind of parse through the BS and understand what's real and what they can probably look past.
No, I love that. Yeah, it's you're doing it as a force for good, but it turned out to also be beneficial from a biz dev side eventually there, which is cool. As you were going through your journey, into what you do here today, like how did you figure it out? Like, was it just like, did you have a mentor that was helping you? Was it just stuff that you tried different things and started just moving more and more in certain directions? I'm curious about how you got there.
Just in terms of like different, like sort of my career.
Different jobs, different. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good question. It was, I tried a lot of different things and I felt like each experience that I had brought me closer to sort of the next step, right? I worked in fitness for a while and I was like, this isn't it. Like, this isn't quite right. I was really tired of like the broiness. Believe it or not, I didn't fit into that space well. And I wanted to really understand like the science of it. And then, moving more into working with patients one-on-one, I love that work so much. And if I'm being honest, Daniel, I was getting pretty burned out of just doing patient work because it's really draining. You know, you're working with people who are often very ill and have been struggling for a long time. And I really wanted to be able to sort of have better balance as well. And so the brand work came later. It was like, okay, well, I'm loving these products. I'm talking about them all the time anyway. I'm also hearing a lot of misinformation about them. So how can we kind of work together to help spread the word and help reach more people? And so this just sort of organically grew. And now I'm, you know, working with brands that I've been a huge fan of, you know, for the last 15 years. So it's really been an organic process. And yes, I am a huge fan of mentorship in every area, you know, obviously on the health side, on the business side, like just across the board.
That's awesome. No, and I think it's cool that like you, like the fitness example for like you were in the field you wanted to be in, right? You obviously took some steps to get there, and then you looked around and realized like this isn't where I want to be, right? And I think that's it's a hard step for people to take, right? Because especially like you put in whatever work it takes to get to a certain point, right? And sometimes you're like, well, this isn't it. It's not it, you know. I had a similar thing when I really wanted to get into SEO, like traditional SEO. I don't know, this was like 8-9 years ago when I was doing digital marketing, and then I worked at a company and realized like I don't really love this. This is not the thing that I want to do. And eventually the Amazon thing kind of fell in my lap, and really ran with it from there because I realized like this is what makes sense to me. You know, but
sometimes it comes down to like the motivation behind it, right? Like you want to go into SEO because for something deeper, and then you're like, maybe it's actually not ticking that box, and then you pivot and it's like, oh, that ticks the box.
For sure. Yeah. And I also think I wouldn't have gotten to the Amazon angle if I didn't do the SEO thing in the first place, right?
Totally.
Like that's the thing. I sold makeup door to door out of college. I remember it was my first sort of multi-level marketing scheme, like a classic 21-year-old. But I remember thinking to myself, like, yeah, 300 no's a day is not for me, but I do a lot of sales now, and I can tell you it doesn't hurt my feelings if you say no. It really doesn't at all, because I've had a lot more no's than that, you know, in the past. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, similarly, like working in the gyms, like what I do now, it's not the same, but I talk to people about their health, and I heard the struggles, and I saw the need, and you know, was able to support people in making behavioral changes, and also just talking to strangers that you don't know. Like all of those skills definitely transfer over. And I mean, it's so like cheesy to say, but I really am grateful for all of those experiences. I didn't quite have the selling door to door, you know, but I have my own equivalent.
yeah, no, you've had the struggles for sure. So to get you there, that's awesome. What advice would you give to somebody like, you know, like your younger self? You know, what are things that maybe you wish you did differently? What are things that you really like that you did, you wish you did more of before you got here?
The main thing that comes to mind is I wish I would have trusted myself more. I think this is the human experience, right? I dealt with a lot of self-doubt, especially in the beginning, going out on my own, you know, being an entrepreneur in my early 20s. It was obviously scary, but I really looked to other people for approval and for guidance when like I said, I'm a huge fan of mentors. They've been pivotal for me in my own growth. But I think that I looked outside of myself too much. Like, tell me if I'm doing this right. Tell me if I'm on the right path, when only you can really know that. And, you know, I even tried throughout the years, I tried like partnering with other healthcare practitioners and sort of joint business ventures. And that just ultimately was never the fit for me. And I wish that I would have trusted myself more and trusted my instinct and followed that curiosity and had, you know, maybe a bit more of a direct line to get to where I knew that I ultimately wanted to be. But that self-doubt it's crippling, isn't it?
I think that's great advice. I think it's something that like confidence is, I think, my biggest gift that I've had, right? Self-confidence in myself. And it's like, I told my mom when, you know, I was selling makeup door to door, I was like, I'm gonna be a millionaire one day, right? Like I always had that mentality. But I see a lot of people don't, right? It's like a lot of people don't trust in themselves. And like even one example was my first Amazon job. One of my colleagues that I worked with, she was absolute stud, you know, knew Amazon inside and out. but I'd be like on calls with her, or I'd like listen to meetings, and I'd hear her say like, "Oh, I'm sorry," like all the time, right? She's just like, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," and I'm like, and I'd ask her, I'd slack her every time, and I'd be like, "Are you sorry? Are you sorry?" Until she stopped saying it, because I'm like, "Look, you're the expert, right? These people are coming to pay you for this thing." That you're starting with giving yourself self-doubt, right? And it's like, she's absolutely crushes it now, and is she would, she crushed it back then. But I think a big thing was, it was really interesting to see when the "I'm sorry" stopped, right? Because as soon as the "I'm sorry" stopped, right, it's like the ability to like have those conversations and make decisions does really change as well. uh, so I think that's great advice for the youngins there, for sure. What for your current business, is it mainly like you on your own? Do you have a team? Is like, how do you think about that, in terms of growth for yourself?
I've tried a few different models and I really enjoy being a solopreneur. I mean, we were talking about this the other day, weren't we, in our conversation? Like, you have this incredible team and you're amazing at like managing all these different pieces and coming together. And oh my gosh, I have so much respect for you and what you do. And also, that's so not for me.
Which is
I
okay. That's the thing, it's
I
important.
have worked back in my corporate days, I, worked as a manager and all of that. And, in my own business, I've had a team of differing size, but I really enjoy working primarily on my own. I really enjoy the relationship building with clients, whether that's one-on-one clients or brand clients. And I, have some assistants who, help me on the more admin side and social media and things like that. But I like to have my hands on every aspect of the work that I'm doing with my brand partners. And so to that end, I'm more of a solopreneur in that regard.
No, and that's awesome. I think that's we talked about this. I think a lot of people, like, it's easy to be like, "Oh, I want this, big agency or big marketing, whatever, big brand, big business." But like, there's a lot of things that come with that, right? And I think like you've been pretty firm on knowing what you want, right? And I think that's also important to recognize. Like, you can live a very fulfilling, accomplished gig, like, and you don't have to have 100 employees, right? Like, to get stuff done, right? You can still make a really, really big impact. I know one of these Amazon sellers I worked with one time, he had a was it $12 million a year Amazon business, and he had two VA employees, right? The guy was on vacation every single time I did a phone call with him, or my brother. So there's some pretty cool things out there, right? And I think, like, when you are kind of thinking about your future, I think it's important to understand, like, what is it that you want, right? What is the type of lifestyle that you want to live? Because your actions are going to change based on that.
I think that's really key what you just said in terms of what kind of lifestyle do you want? Like, what do you want that day to day look like? Not just what is your big goal, but how are you going to get there? And as career driven as we all are, that really does have to be balanced, right, with the rest of life. And that's definitely something that I've had to work really hard on, is like, I need to have hobbies, and like I need to like be a fully developed human outside of this. Like, now I do pottery, and you can see my background. There's like 100 plants in my house, like, and really sort of developing I think a lot of it too is your creativity outside of your work, because that all translates over. If it's all work and no play, right, then you can't bring that life experience and that external creativity to what you do. And so I love that you said that, because that's been one of my big goals this year, has been to just sort of fully flesh out that part of my life.
I think that's awesome. And I think that the creative side often gets misunderstood, right? It's like, oh, creative means like you do art and you build like content and stuff like that. But it's like, no, like, everything you do on a day-to-day basis does involve some subset of like creativity, right? Like, we'll create new software for like a new dashboard all of a sudden, right? Because we just like have an idea. Like, yeah, it's data driven, but there is a creativity side that allows you to step away from the day-to-day to come up with that idea, right? Like, I came up with ranking one day because I was at a concert, and I'm like, I don't know why, my just like creative side kicked in, and I'm like, what if I try ranking on this ad campaign when I get home? And I like got home and I tested it out, And in like 3 days, I was the #1 product in my category. And I'm like, oh, cool. Right. But
Wow.
that doesn't happen without that outlet to like give myself the freedom to get creative, when
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Exactly.
that's cool. Yeah. Like, it's like, you don't have to be a traditional creative to bring creativity to your day to day.
Agreed. And I would say that I've never been sort of a traditional creative. And so I'm like, this whole conversation is just like, yes, I am a creative person. Like, what does that look like? And it's really like, getting on a call with a client and being like, okay, this is the problem. How can we solve it? And that is a creative process. And so it really does permeate all areas.
No, 100%. And it's also like, there's a lot of studies on like, once you become a domain expert, it becomes easier to like learn and even like create more neural pathways because you've learned how to do if this, that, then statements, right? And so I find like for folks that are really seasoned at a certain skill, or if you're not there yet, start working on trying to get really seasoned at a skill, because it does help open up like some other things you don't think of, right? Like I don't necessarily manage like social advertising or certain marketing issues that are outside of Amazon, but I'm usually good at solving those problems because I've solved a variation of it for Amazon, right? It's just a different flavor, but it's the same ice cream at the end of the day,
Sure. It translates.
Yeah. Well, super duper helpful, Kaytee. Let's see what other fun questions I have for you. I guess is there any like particularly interesting idea that you had on your end and something you tried and didn't work, let's say on the biz dev side, and how'd you handle that?
Something I tried that didn't work. Ooh, really put me on the spot here. What did I try that didn't work? I mean, outside of the things I've already shared, which is
yeah.
the whole team and then changing my mind.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, oh gosh, I feel like we're all living, breathing examples of what didn't work, right? Because that's what always brings us to where we are now. A recent example, like there's a client that I'm working with, and we're trying to figure out how to expand reach. And there's sort of like 3 buckets of reach that I think about. There's reaching consumers, there's reaching the press, and there's reaching other healthcare practitioners. And so sometimes we decide to go one direction and it doesn't pick up as much steam as we want. And all it takes is that little pivot. Like, okay, so we've been targeting consumers directly. We've been speaking about nutrition message. Right, let's say it's a food product. We've been speaking about nutrition message. We've been targeting consumers, and we're not seeing as big of a growth as we want. Okay, so now let's pivot. Let's talk directly to the press. Let's do a desk side. Let's do a press Q&A. Let's go to, the people who are coming with the ideas of the stories that are coming out, and let's bring this topic to them and then see what that happens. Or let's go directly to healthcare practitioners where this product is so relevant for them in their field because they're working with people on their health every day. And so now they can talk about it. And sometimes it's like that pivot of who we're speaking to. And so it's not a mistake. It may not even be the messaging. It's just, who are we actually speaking to about this? And who are we helping to understand the product, bring awareness to the product to really see the kind of growth that we want.
That's cool. No, I totally get that. That's like a similar track on the Amazon front. Typically, it's like we have our first, let's say, groupings of keywords. I call them educated guesses, right? Especially if we don't have any data there. And a lot of the times, say 80% of the time, that works, right? And you don't need to kind of hit the stage 2. But sometimes you realize, shoot, like it's more competitive than we thought. We don't have the reviews. We're too expensive. Like we're just not converting that same way. And so then we might start conquesting brands instead, right? And going after, instead of category keywords, conquesting. But a lot of the times it's like there's always an audience that will buy from you as long as, the product's decent. Sometimes you just have to stretch a little harder than other brands, to get that. Would you say for brands like you mentioned the 3 buckets that you're typically trying to reach out to, do you think the brands that are the most successful are ones that operate on all buckets, or they win on a specific bucket best, or how do you typically see that?
I've really seen success in both ways. I usually think it's a combination of multiple things. Like it's usually maybe not all three, while many brands do that very well, right? They start with one, and then once that's really going, then you expand organically. But I typically think, if we're doing two at once. So for example, speaking to consumers and press directly can often go hand in hand, right? So like I'll often be a spokesperson in media interviews. So, let's say brand X has a PR agency, and that agency is, sending out information on a regular basis about the product. And then they can say, oh, hey, we actually have, Kaytee on board here, and she can do media interviews about this product, right? Again, adding that credibility. And then on the other side, like I mentioned, Medical News Today just approached me the other day for comments on this study. That happens all the time, right? Because they want to go to the experts to really break apart this information. And so you're sort of working with the press and consumers at the same time, and then you're developing contacts there, and then you can put together a desk side. And so often they do happen organically. I don't think it's like one formula is key, because we're talking about numbers, and every product and brand is different. And some products, some supplement companies I work with, they want to market directly to healthcare practitioners, and that is their demographic, and that's who they want to be known for. And for me, like I said, I really value relationships. I think it's really important for me to get to know, the values and the mission, so that I can support in the way that's most appropriate. Because if you want to speak to healthcare practitioners, the way I do a media interview is going to be very different than if I'm talking about that same product, but to consumers. So I think it's very, very dependent on, the goals.
And I think that's makes so much sense. I think that a lot of times brands try to get into a one size fits all sort of solution, right? But I mean, I can even see the trying to speak to healthcare professionals versus trying to speak to consumers, right? Like I think excuse me. I feel like just anecdotally, when I know those like the influencers online that like are really good at taking complicated, let's just say science on nutrition, right? And they simplify it, right, for folks. I think that's probably very different than like if I was speaking to somebody who really has some advanced level knowledge on this subject, right? Like they probably don't want to hear the 101 stuff.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. There's a brand I'm working with right now, and we're filming ads for Meta. And so I'm going to be the spokesperson in that scenario, versus there's another brand I'm working with who I'm going to a healthcare practitioner symposium, and I'm going to be speaking to other dietitians about their product. These are going to be two very different conversations that we're having, both valid, both super valuable, just different goals.
That's cool. Yeah. I think that's a really, really great bit of information for us. Well, Kaytee, I don't want to steal all your time here, but it's been wonderful to have you. I think it's fair to share our story of how we met. So Kaytee and I were at a conference called Expo West, which is one of the bigger CPG conferences and natural food conferences here in California. We both happened to be on this little balcony outside area, and the door locked with us and a bunch of strangers. So we were all forced to have a conversation for about 30 minutes while they brought security to break open the door for us as we were stuck. Turns out Kaytee and I actually have some mutual clients there, so it's really interesting to connect. And I've just been so interested by her business and what you're working on there. I thought it was really, really interesting, and I think it's the kind of thing that brands should know about. It's definitely something that I would like to utilize more with other clients that we have. So where can people find you, Kaytee?
Yeah, so you can find me on my website. So my name is spelled a little funny. I had an identity crisis when I was in the 5th grade. I'm not a K-A-T-I-E. I'm K-A-Y-T-E-E. I told you, I've always been a little bit of a rebel. It's KayteeHadley.com. My media page is just /media. My media kit's on there. Some.
Cool. Yeah, we'll tag you in our LinkedIn posts as well. But perfect. Kaytee, it's been wonderful having you on here today. Appreciate the fun times, and make sure to bring that extra key around for those tough situations.
Such a pleasure, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.